I'm sure you have questions.
Thank you, Geoff, for being here. And I will open the floor for questions.
So first, I want to thank you and your team for all of the support that you did give us. We were one of the states that benefited from the cyber scans and are working toward expanding the services within our operation to ensure that we can. I'll echo what I said yesterday. It augmented our already, the cybersecurity that we already had in place. But it was nice to also be able to talk about it and to talk with our citizens and to talk with folks about the partnership that we had that I think really helped provide more confidence in the system. Having said that, you guys had made a commitment to us to work with us on making a critical infrastructure designation, and it didn't really feel like it happened that way when the directive finally came down. I think we had about a day's notice on a phone call with the secretaries. And I appreciate having a little bit more information today. I think we still want to ensure that there is a meaningful process and really identifying what this means, and with meaningful input from elections administrators, from boots on the ground elections administrators, up to state elections officials as well. So I would like to hear more about what you're planning to do to engage us in a more meaningful way moving forward.
Certainly, thank you. So the next step in establishing a subsector would be to begin to charter the coordination groups. This will, because of the nature of election infrastructure, reach to state and local government officials first to begin to shape how that would be chartered. DHS will have a charter as the sector-specific agency that gives us charters to make these groups, basically. If I had to posit a guess, there would be potentially 3 coordination groups. One of state and local officials, one of federal agencies that can assist. Those 2 would be government coordination councils, and the third would likely be the private sector vendor community, potentially advocacy community, based on how the initial state and local government officials want to charter. The timeline for this is there's not an exact clear timeline, but we're looking for opportunities to begin that process.
Couple of questions. In your estimation, what is the risk profile of a system that is not internet facing?
Low. And I kind of think it's funny to, low but not none. I think it's funny to come and speak to this group twice, because I do think through mechanisms like the VVSG and obviously the security by diversity, that the actual voting systems are probably the most secure aspect of election infrastructure. This has certainly been practiced, and there's continuity of operations for those. We found a lot of the touch points on the rest of election infrastructure to be a little less prepared.
And then on the other side, I think one of the places that we could focus is if you could provide resources to the labs as the systems are going through tests, because at that point that spreads out to all the different counties. So if we can have an assessment and a risk profile on the systems to provide best practices at the lab as we go through the test as part of our security and penetration testing, then I think that is something we could use as vendors to inform out to the counties who buy the systems.
Thank you. That's
because that would be a whole lot more efficient, I believe.
Others?
I'll just add, I know you're probably more the messenger than the convener of these groups. But I would hope that you would go back and talk to your leadership and let them know that not having a clear timeline is problematic for us, and that we're hoping that since this designation was made, and I recognize it was made by the former secretary, it's kind of like it's been crickets, and we'd like to see more information about what that means and really identify a clear path forward.
Absolutely.
Others? I got a bunch.
Go ahead.
It's your all's committee, so I don't want to.
And I guess one of the questions is, will you be coming out with some kind of document explaining it more? And because we hear it's voluntary, and I guess that's the concern. What is it truly voluntary, or is it not voluntary?
It's absolutely voluntary. Even if no one shows up, we will still write into the National Infrastructure Protection Plan that elections are considered critical. We'll still give priority to anyone in this sector who wants those services. However, attending the councils or even the existence of the councils is absolutely voluntary and to be charted by individuals like yourself.
Okay, and there wouldn't be anything that would come down. I guess the part of the concern is, are there like the cybersecurity framework? If states don't follow certain things, or they're nobody wants a gotcha. I guess that's the concern.
Not at all. This is not regulatory or have any sinews attached at all. If there is funding to come, and I'm not in a position to say that, those have their own conditions, but that's typical to grants.
Thank you.
Jeff, with regard to the subject matter working groups that you guys will put together, I'll rephrase Lori's question because I don't think she asked it right. On the second date, who calls who?
On the second day, who calls whom?
Yeah. That's what Lori was asking. We're ready for our second date. Who calls who?
So my office is preparing to reach out with you all. There has been a administration transition that has occupied our time for the moment, but we will be working towards communicating with everyone as quickly as possible.
And I just wanted to add, we have been working very closely with you guys, and it has been a good partnership. And you're right, it has been voluntary. And we're looking to utilize them with our statewide voter registration system. Some of the stuff we actually paid to have a third party do, we're now going to partner with DHS, and they'll come in and do that, like penetration tests, stuff like that. So to that aspect, we really appreciate the partnership that we've had so far.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I want to echo what Bob and Lori said about the services. Wisconsin was also one of those states that utilized the hygiene scans, and we partnered with our state CIO, and we found that to be of critical value and importance leading up to the presidential election. So we thank you for that. I'm sure you heard Josh's presentation about services that NIST can provide, specifically related to voting equipment security, and what are your thoughts with DHS's role with that? For election officials, it's easier, I think, to have, at minimum, the least amount of different context, depending on the subject matter. And I know that you guys focused a lot on, like, voter registration systems, and you went through your list of infrastructure, and it's pretty vast. What are your thoughts in regard to specifically voting equipment? And I guess a follow-up would be, do you think that would be best addressed by groups like this? Or I guess I'm just looking for your general thoughts.
Okay. To answer that, I think I first want to step back and kind of characterize the NIST DHS relationship. DHS is kind of operational. We have incident responders. We take the overall standards that NIST creates. We provide input, but we assist people in implementing them. The very kind of core of my office U.S. CERT Computer Emergency Readiness Center, or team, was initially a NIST pilot program way back when. So there's a long history of handing off developing standards and identifying the way things work with NIST, and then DHS taking this to begin to help implementing and begin to help stakeholders implement. As I said, we're big fans of the cybersecurity framework. We look forward to the new release and getting ourselves completely up to date on that.
And Matt, what I meant to imply earlier was that given all of the folks in our community, whether it's the EAC Standards Board or the Board of Advisors or NASD or this body seems to be more specifically tied to the kind of stuff that Jeff's talking about because of our cybersecurity and the fact that we're talking with hardware and certification and specifications and all of those kind of things. And all I mean to suggest is that in this relationship going forward, I would like to see this organization, the TGDC component, be the folks who are interfacing with DHS as they get into this subject matter expert guys that are facilitating their ongoing process.
So I appreciate that, and I think there's agreement. I would flip that actually and say that DHS, and Jeff has been at the last 2, if not 3 meetings, is welcome to participate in the work we're doing. Right? We through the TGDC and then the EAC set the standards for the voting systems, and DHS has information to provide to help inform our process, right, for saying that. And it's something we talked about. And so as DHS begins to work on whatever this critical infrastructure is, EAC, I think, has been very active in pushing them to communicate what this is and answer these questions via, I mean, our avenues, this body, the Standards Board, the Board of Advisors, however we can put and facilitate that conversation. That's been a focus for the EAC because election officials, the elections community has a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, right? And that's pretty public. I don't think that's, and so we've been pushing on that, and I think this is the first step in that conversation is here today, and it's good that it's in front of this body, which actually leads me to one of my questions, which is leading into the election throughout last year, the EAC worked with you all, states and locals, via the Standards Board, Board of Advisors to facilitate your all services, the availability, all of that. Seemed to work, seemed lots of states took advantage of it. And then this designation comes. What was wrong with the approach we took through the election where that facilitation was taking place and you weren't going to have this designation in place to do it? That the relationship, all those services you put up there are available whether this is critical infrastructure or not, is my understanding. So why now, after the successful relationships that were built throughout the 2016 election?
So I agree that that mechanism worked for 2016 as best it could, and we really appreciate your facilitation. It was absent the full threat information available to a critical infrastructure sector. Additionally, the priority against other requests wouldn't be there, potentially waiting 9 months for risk and vulnerability assessment. May not work on a procurement timeline. So this step was felt to be necessary to institutionalize this as a vital and important aspect of our democracy.
Okay. So I guess that leads me to, presumably it was vital and important before based on
Right.
what was going on. I guess my question is, what services, what information, maybe is there additional threat information that could have been shared that wasn't, because this wasn't critical infrastructure? I mean, those services were already there for the states and locals, and so what additional is brought to the table through this designation?
So there were the subsequent protections that work at an international level and the ability to discuss vulnerabilities in a manner that should rapidly allow election officials to address them or for vulnerability disclosure to occur at the vendor side. We found that in other sectors, these are considered highly valuable. It's much more common among chief information security officers to work within the vulnerability disclosure process. But if without institutionalizing this through a designation of critical infrastructure, there's no guarantee that the services would be available.
Okay, so DHS may not in the future have provided those services to election officials despite their requests.
Right. So, yeah, they are, for the most part, limited resources, and we do have to make decisions on where a request falls in the queue. So, the designation was really to institutionalize the availability of services and information sharing.
So that's helpful. Presuming this was a good idea in January when the designation was made, and the promise to work with state and local election officials before making a determination or as part of it, if this was a good idea in January, presumably it would have been a good idea in May, June, July, whatever. Why was the effort not made prior to the designation to have that working relationship? Why was it necessary that January had to be the time versus, going through the process that was discussed to work with state and local officials?
So we had under the past administration, there was a request to hold off until after the election certification in late December. This was, however, a priority of the previous secretary, which paid less than a month's opportunity for him to make the decision. He felt that he had been in conversation, conversing about his opinion on this since August. And he, with the advice of his counsel, believed it was a necessary step to ensure future protections of election infrastructure.
Go ahead, Brian.
Do you have more thoughts in that direction, or 'cause I'm going to go in a little different direction?
No, go ahead.
Hey, Jeff. Thanks for being here today. I wanted to kind of go back to some of your initial discussion about the definition of infrastructure and maybe the scope of the charter document that presumably would be coming out. I think everyone around this table, and at this point, you probably know that when you're talking about election infrastructure, it's wide, right? It's the tentacles are out there. So just as an example, and maybe you're seeing this in other industries, things like that aren't connected really to election officials, things like ballot printers, third-party ballot printers, right? California certifies those, but that's generally about as far as it goes. Would those third parties be included under this definition of infrastructure potentially?
They could be. As a kind of third-party vendor, or you said that some of them are certified. What is important about understanding what is within the scope of election infrastructure, that's really what type of information DHS will help filter to you all. So if there is a threat against ballot printers, we would identify this body as the group that needs to know that there's a threat against ballot printers.
So I appreciate the scoping question, and you may have just touched polling places. Okay, that was included on your slide of, and I know it's voluntary, but presumably, apparently based on your last answer, if there was a threat against polling places, whatever that means, you all would issue guidance, you all would issue what? Because securing polling, I mean, you talk about broad in scope, and I mean, we're lucky to have enough polling places, let alone, if, and this is an example, this may not be what you all would actually say, but if it had to have closed circuit television around it, some sort of monitoring, security detection, I mean, it's hard enough to find a polling place, let alone secure it in that way. And so the question is, walk me through how that works. How would that guidance be provided regarding polling places to help election officials in a voluntary way?
So I guess in sequence of information sharing, there might be best practices learned from handling mass gatherings. However, this is an area where I actually find the election community to be most mature. So in all likelihood, we wouldn't be providing guidance. It would very much be yourselves sharing the information that you know, the best practices that you employ. And if we are aware of a threat, we would be sharing our awareness of that threat with you. You guys are the risk managers. You own and operate and facilitate the process, and you make the risk decisions on your own. So
you're saying there wouldn't be a situation in which DHS, for instance, would put out a checklist, let's say, for securing polling places that says, and I'm just throwing it, I don't know if it's a good example, fenced in, monitored, and whatever, has intrusion, some sort of security locks or anything. That's not something you'd foresee for the physical security of polling places.
no, not in any type of guidance that way. I would think that a document or guidance could be produced on how to write a continuity of operations plan, or things that I know exist within your community, which is why I kind of recognize the maturity of this community in very many aspects of physical infrastructure protection and some aspects of cybersecurity protection.
You mentioned the sunshine laws, and you said state sunshine laws don't apply. Is that true? I've heard the FOIA part, but does DHS have the ability to say that state sunshine laws don't apply when information is shared in that way?
We could have councils discuss this,
Yeah.
but that's how that's how protected critical infrastructure information by statute has been arranged.
So if private companies are involved, so private security scanning companies or something, does that also, so can they not turn around and use the information that they find as part of scanning to then monetize that, for lack of a better term, to benefit from that scanning? So they're part of your process with scanning, a state brings you in, and then they can turn around and say, hey, we know you have these vulnerabilities and we'd like to help you mitigate them.
So
Do they
vendors-
have confidentiality applied to them?
So we don't have third-party vendors doing our scanning, so
Okay.
your information is entirely yours. We don't share it with anyone else. You have the opportunity to share your experience, your lessons learned, the things that you did to mitigate any vulnerabilities found. So I think that would avoid the opportunity for kind of that exploitation.
We did use a third party, and they did have to sign a confidentiality agreement, so just.
I had a concern raised by a local elections administrator who's been working through his county IT to try to get some support, some scans. And the feedback that I heard was that it's taking a really, really long time. So I don't know if perhaps he's going about asking through the wrong channels, or how, how would a local or a state, obviously the state would be a little bit more obvious, but how would you suggest that we engage with you to ensure that you know that it's an election entity that's requesting this service and support?
This email is monitored by several people, and if we're talking about cyber hygiene scanning, I'm very surprised to hear this, because we can have a response and have that system operating within a week. So please connect them to me and this email, and it'll happen.
You mentioned DHS, and specifically your section is going to be the sector-specific agency, is that correct?
Yes.
In this subsector, traditionally, what is it, government facility subsector, traditionally it's who? GSA? Who?
So within NPPD, which is my organization, there's another branch called Federal Protective Services. And GSA and FPS are co-leads of the government facilities sector. However, there are other subsectors within this. For example, the education facilities sector, which has the SSA of the Department of Education. This is modeled in the same way, where there aren't necessarily there isn't any level of interaction at the GSA FPS side, unless for some reason the chartered body would request it.
So did the declaration, or the, I don't know, designation, I'm sorry, of critical infrastructure, as part of that declare your section, and I'm sorry, I forget the acronym. I'm trying.
No, they've tried to change it.
Yeah, make you all the sector specific. So was that part of the designation? How does that happen?
Yeah, so the secretary, with his authority to review and establish critical infrastructure, sent a memo internally assigning that responsibility within the department to the National Protection and Programs Directorate, which is my body.
The county that I reside in 2 weeks ago, I think, 2 weeks ago tomorrow, I think, was hacked by ransom. And everything in the county was down for, I think they may have had some phones up within a week, but I'm not sure everything is up yet. And I communicated with one of the elections officials there, assuming that the IT system was somewhat integrated, and they sounds like it was, and that their process of handling the election, say this ransom would have occurred during the election, would have just pushed them into a complete manual mode. Has that happened anywhere in the country? I mean, I think we've had 2 or 3 counties in Ohio that have had this happen in the.
So I can't speak specific. I mean, ransomware is a known issue in IT security, I would tell you, and DHS, and we put it out to our Standards Board of Advisors, put out information about handling ransomware. Not just, I mean, it was given to election officials, but it's not election specific. And that's part of any election official's continuity of operations plan, is understanding and having a plan in place to handle those sorts of attacks and attempts. That's part of how you plan for an election in that way.
Geoff, if you could talk a little bit about the relationship between DHS and state Homeland Security offices, like we have our NJKIC, and when should we be working with them, or when do you guys work together? When do we go to you and not them, or should we go through our state Homeland Security and then through like how's that relationship work? If you can talk about that.
So I would say we have an excellent relationship with all state Homeland Security offices, and you can operate in the way most comfortable to you. As Commissioner sometimes says with elections, it depends. My particular agency's responsibility is called asset response. This means that we focus on bringing your operations back to bear. We are less focused on the law enforcement and attribution side of the house. Those responsibilities at a federal level reside with DOJ. And so I know that in many states, fusion centers could have a role. Somebody might feel more comfortable going there, but that tends to be a bit more of a law enforcement staffed body. So it's all about where you're comfortable with the starting point. Our responsibility is to share information with everyone possible.
Hi, Jeff. One other question. So given the certification and the testing and the fact that the counties manage the systems once they're purchased, do you see a concern with any foreign or partisan ownership of a manufacturer?
Not initially, not at this point. No. That's not something I'm trying to deter.
Okay, awesome.
Our voting system test laboratories are a critical part of what we obviously do here, the EAC does, and really even states rely on. Do they fall into the sort of private sector arena that of people you would be working with to not improve testing, but to, they have information, whatever? Is that someone you'd work with, VSTLs traditionally, the test laboratories?
We do work with several national labs. I don't know how many VSTLs. However, I would think that in kind of working with EAC through this, you guys would be the representative body that tells us how they operate and where they are where it's appropriate to engage them, yourselves or the election officials.
An example of that was VIP for this past election. Because we embed them into our website, I had a concern that, would there be an issue there? And I know you guys ended up reaching out to them. And so in that aspect, there's a, third party that really is not I give them my information, they share it. And so I know you guys definitely work with them on that.
So that's I appreciate you bringing that up because it's a really good scoping point. And I know you all are working through it, so the answer maybe we don't know. But whether it's VSDLs, VIP, frankly, the AP, at what point does this line of, you mentioned the parties aren't included, which is only interesting because that's where much of the news coverage came from around all of this, right? And the information. So how do you decide where to draw that line? I mean, is the AP, do they fall under critical infrastructure in elections because of what they do as far as stringers and results reporting, or is that?
So the media is already part of critical infrastructure in a separate infrastructure sector. However, there's several instances where kind of there's a cross-sector dependency. And this would be one of them. We kind of handle that somewhat frequently. And it's up to how the group would like to charter its bounds as to whether you want to invite them to the table for every single meeting or invite in an ad hoc as appropriate manner.
So walk me, I promise it's just helping. Walk me through the steps. What are the I know there's not a timeline, but what are the next? What happens next? There's these groups apparently that get formed. How do they get formed? What or who decides who's invited and who's not? How does that happen just functionally?
So that's actually something where DHS is going to solicit feedback from its partners that we've met through this past election as to what the shaping and scoping body for the first charter should be, and that will be taking place shortly. That will develop an initial draft charter to start to share around that community, and then that would convene a group that begins to create the councils, if they so choose.
Okay, so there's a group that then creates the groups. Is that correct? I'm being serious. I'm not. Yeah. I really. So that there is a group that has to create the framework around it.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Who? Go ahead.
Yeah, who are those people and how are those people selected?
Not selected per se, but it was seeking subject matter expertise for DHS to begin to shape the appropriate chartering, and it would be the people we know to be subject matter experts through our past engagement. So the list has yet to be determined, but in all likelihood, since I've spoken here twice, this would be one forum.
Go ahead, Diane.
Totally different direction.
Great.
It's been fascinating.
There's a
though.
lot of questions.
So DHS, I know, has a really active internal group that's OAST or something. I don't know if you call it something that DHS is kind of one of the leaders in accessibility, quite frankly, in terms of ICT stuff, which is really nice, given you're also focused on security. It's a nice balance. But I assume that that function is really internal to your agency rather than the work you do, for example, supporting election officials, talking about security scans, et cetera, does not include accessibility. So I guess that's what I'm asking is, as you're helping these folks with security issues, is there any ability to also help them, or at least make sure that whatever they're doing to ensure security isn't messing up accessibility on the back end or ignoring it, kind of thing? And I know you all do a good job in-house. I just don't know the extent to which that expertise that you have in-house bleeds over to your external technical assistance.
And welcome to that debate.
Yeah.
Yeah, welcome.
Yeah. Oh, the easy one? You're right. We do have quite extensive accessibility office. Now, as I showed, my office is aligned to a cybersecurity mission, and the two have not been bringing the accessibility to stakeholders to bear, but as chartered, that can absolutely be a collaborative function.
That would be extraordinarily helpful. Honestly, DHS and Department of Ed, there's a few federal agencies that have always kind of been on the forefront of accessibility stuff, and others who have not done so much. So that would, you have some internal expertise and some procedures in-house that I think if your in-house people could talk to you guys about helping external people would be really helpful for, again, balancing some of this stuff.
One last one. Bottom line, I'm talking to Cheryl down in Jackson County, Ohio, tiny county, and she wants to know, what does this mean to me? How is this going to impact my operation? What do I tell her?
You don't tell her very little. You tell her it impacts her very little. It might mean that at the election director or the secretary of state level, that someone has a clearance and has made risk management decisions and hopefully passed those risk management profiles down through the structure. But if you call law enforcement first, if you have your phone tree, those all remain the same. We don't have any new authorities. We don't have any. We are here to help, but we cannot compel anything.
All right, anything else? I want to thank you for coming, for beginning this discussion. It's important, right? And I know our staff's been talking to you about the importance. Election officials are wanting to know what this is going to mean to them. They are concerned and just are wanting answers, and this is an important first step. The other thing, and this touches on something Lori said that's really important, is I'd encourage you, working through us, however we can be helpful, to share those communications, that information as rapidly as you can. It's something we talk about a lot in elections, working at election speed, right? There's always another election. There's elections going on right now. And so it may, you all, and I don't want you to rush either. I want you to answer the questions and go through this in a partner, but understand that election officials are constantly moving on to the next election. And so the answers, these understanding what this means operationally, this is just another piece of uncertainty in an election official's life, and their entire mission is to limit that uncertainty, right? Ironically, I think a little bit of your mission too, right? Yeah. To limit uncertainty. And so whatever we can do to facilitate answering those questions and helping election officials eliminate some of that uncertainty. If this CI designation is their reality, they deserve the answers to those questions and to move forward. And so I encourage you to continue, starting today, share information and use these forums to do that. So thank you for answering, indulging me and the rest of us on this. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.